Welcome, listeners, to History 1. Tonight we pull back the velvet curtain, not on the grand balls or celebrated battles you know, but on the silent corridors, the locked diaries, and the sealed tombs. We whisper of the things they never wanted you to hear, the lies woven into tapestries, the blood wiped from marble floors, the true heirs forgotten in shadowed dungeons. This is not the history of crowns, but of what lies, heavy and tarnished, beneath the crown, secrets they buried. If you dare to know what the palace walls have kept silent for centuries, make sure you are subscribed. For the truth, once uncovered, cannot be buried again. The story begins not in a grand palace, but in a forgotten sub-basement of the Vatican Apostolic Archive, a place so restricted even most cardinals require a dispensation to enter. Here, in 1982, a young and overly zealous archivist named Father Leo Kirsch was chasing a misplaced ledger regarding Renaissance liturgical vestments. The shelf number led him instead to a plain, iron-bound chest, devoid of marking, its lock fused with age. Driven by a scholar's instinct, he carefully worked the mechanism open. Inside, he found no ledger, but a bundle of letters wrapped in decayed black velvet. The topmost sheet was not parchment, but vellum, and bore a seal that made his blood run cold. The personal cipher of Lucrezia Borgia. The handwriting, however, was not the elegant script of the infamous Duchess, but a frantic, spidery scrawl. The opening line read, "To the Holy Father I write this with poison in my veins and truth upon my lips. My daughter, the one they call my shame, is not the child of sin, but of the Church. She was conceived not in passion, but in a calculated rite, a crimson pact to bind the papal bloodline to the rising powers of the north." Father Leo looked around, the silence of the vault now feeling watchful. He knew the official history, Lucrezia's several marriages, her alleged poisonings, her later pious turn. But this spoke of something else entirely. A secret birth, a ritual, a pact. As he read further, the letter described a midnight ceremony in a chapel beneath Castel Sant'Angelo, witnessed by her father, Pope Alexander VI, and a mysterious envoy from a northern court identified only by the emblem of a black sun. The child, a girl named Giovanna, was smuggled out of Rome to be raised in anonymity, her existence erased from all records. But Lucrezia's letter claimed the bloodline endured, woven secretly into the nobility of Europe, a hidden thread of Borgia ambition and papal will running beneath the thrones of nations. The final line was a plea and a curse. "Find her line, for they possess not just our blood, but the key to what we buried beneath the foundation stone of St. Peter's, a truth that can unmake faiths." Trembling, Father Leo made a decision that would define his life and end his career. He did not report the find. He carefully transcribed the letter, replaced the originals exactly as he found them, and began a private, obsessive quest. The Crimson Pact was his first thread into a labyrinth of buried secrets that connected the seemingly unconnected scandals of European royalty. He began to see patterns where history saw coincidence. The sudden, convenient deaths of heirs that cleared paths for obscure cousins. The strange recurring symbols in royal jewellery. A black sun, a serpent swallowing a key. The persistent rumours of changelings and hidden prisoners in castles from Edinburgh to Prague. He realised Lucrezia's letter was not an endpoint, but a genesis. It was a key to a door that opened onto a vast dark corridor stretching back centuries and forward to the modern era. He was no longer just an archivist. He was an archaeologist of the forbidden. Father Leo's first investigation led him away from Rome, to the damp grey stone of Stirling Castle in Scotland. His clue was a marginal note in a 16th century French diplomatic dispatch, mentioning a Roman ward in the household of King James IV, a girl of mysterious origin who served as a lady-in-waiting to his queen, Margaret Tudor. The girl was noted for her unusual knowledge of herbs and her striking auburn hair, a trademark of the Borgias. James III was a Renaissance king, fascinated by alchemy, science, and the occult. He maintained a network of spies and intellectuals across Europe. Was it possible the envoy of the Black Sun had been Scottish? Leo pored over Scottish records, finding a curious entry. The king had financed the construction of a secret chamber, a Larach Dorcha, or dark foundation, within the castle walls. Its purpose was unknown. He cross-referenced this with the timeline from Lucrezia's letter. The child, Giovanna, would have been a young woman in the early 1500s, right when James IV was strengthening ties with the papacy. The Battle of Flodden in 1513, where James met his brutal end, was a historical pivot. But Leo found a disregarded chronicle from a wounded knight, recovered in a Yorkshire monastery. It claimed that in the weeks before Flodden, a sealed message from Rome had reached the king, carried by a silent woman with fire in her hair. After reading it, James became despondent, telling his inner circle, "The pact is broken, the crown is forfeit." He then marched to Flodden with what many saw as a death wish. Did James IV know of the Crimson Pact? Was he, or someone close to him, part of the hidden bloodline? The fate of the mysterious Roman ward is unrecorded after Flodden. She vanishes. But Leo found a record of a ship, the Star of the North, sailing from Leith to Copenhagen in late 1513, its passenger manifest listing a Lady Johanna of no surname, accompanied by Danish guards. The trail turned north, toward the court of the House of Oldenburg. The secret, it seemed, had survived the slaughter of a Scottish king and fled to new soil. The Borgia seed, planted in Scottish court, had been transplanted to Scandinavia, where it would bear a strange and poisonous fruit in the next generation. The Danish court of King Christian II, Christian the Tyrant, was a cauldron of intrigue. Known for the brutal Stockholm bloodbath and his marriage to Isabella of Austria, he was also a man of progressive ideas and profound paranoia. It was here, in Copenhagen's royal archives, that Father Leo found the next piece. Buried in the inventory of Queen Isabella's personal effects was a curious item. En kasse af sort træ, indeholdende et portræt af en ukendt kvinde med et solsymbol på brystet. A box of black wood, containing a portrait of an unknown woman with a sun symbol on her breast. The box was noted as a gift from Lady Johanna, the Queen's confidential attendant. Leo's heart raced. The sun symbol. He requested the restoration records and found a conservator's note from 1891 describing the portrait. Subject: female, approximately 30 years, auburn hair. Upon closer inspection, the sun pendant is not a mere jewel. It is meticulously painted to depict a celestial body with faint dark spots, a sunspot pattern matching astronomical drawings from the early 1500s. A black sun. Lady Johanna was Giovanna. She'd come to Denmark carrying her identity not in name but in a symbol. But her role was more than just a keeper of heirlooms. Christian II's reign collapsed in 1523, forcing him into exile. His children were taken hostage by his uncle, Frederick II. Yet one child, his daughter Dorothea, eventually married Frederick II of the Palatinate. The official histories treat this as standard dynastic fallout. But Leo found a series of encrypted letters between Christian in exile and his wife Isabella, referring constantly to the safeguard of our true legacy and the promise made to Johanna's line. In one, Christian writes despairingly, "They have taken the branches, but the root, thanks to the Silent Sister, remains ours." The Silent Sister was Johanna. She had not just been a lady-in-waiting, she had been a guardian. Leo hypothesized that Johanna, the hidden Borgia daughter, had been tasked with protecting the idea of the bloodline, perhaps by ensuring it merged with, and was concealed within, a legitimate royal house. The Oldenburgs, through Christian's troubled line, now carried the secret. And when Christian's descendants eventually inherited the throne of Great Britain through James VI and I, the hidden thread would be spun into the very fabric of the British monarchy. The Crimson Pact was not about a single child. It was about infiltrating and steering the destiny of kingdoms from the shadows. The thread led Leo to England, to the tumultuous era of the Stuart kings. James I of England, VI of Scotland, was a scholar king obsessed with absolutism, witchcraft and his own lineage. He famously traced his descent from the mythical Banquo. But Leo searched for a different, quieter lineage. In the secret correspondence of James's powerful favourite, George Villiers, Duke of Buckingham, he found an oblique reference. Buckingham, writing to his confidant about securing the king's favour for obscure Italian alchemists, states, "His Majesty finds great solace in the man's arts, saying he speaks with the authority of the hidden grandmother, a phrase that pleases his deep humour. Hidden grandmother. To most, it would mean nothing. To Leo, it was a beacon. He combed through accounts of James's court, finding records of a reclusive Italian woman, a Mistress Joan, who resided for a time at Somerset House in the 1620s. She was listed as an embroiderer to the Queen, but had no known workshop or clients. She died in 1625, the same year as James, and was buried in an unmarked grave at a small Catholic church in London. Her will, however, survived in a private solicitor's archive. It left her entire estate, a modest sum of money, and a small chest of private papers, to a kinsman in the Scottish line, he who bears the mark. The chest was never claimed, and the solicitor's records noted its contents were of a Romish and curious nature, destroyed for safety. This was the methodology of the secret. Not grand conspiracies, but quiet, deniable insertions. A lady-in-waiting here, an alchemist patron there, a forgotten embroiderer. The bloodline was not seeking the throne directly. It was acting as a whisper in the ear of power, a subtle influence. The mark the will referred to could be a birthmark, a symbol, a temperament. James I's own son, Charles III, would display a fatal combination of traits: a belief in divine right that bordered on papal absolutism, a political inflexibility, and a tragic destiny. Was this the bloodline's influence? A hidden Catholic sympathy and autocratic tendency, woven into a Protestant king, destined to clash with his parliament and lose his head? The secret did not guarantee success. It merely planted seeds, sometimes of greatness, often of ruin. The execution of Charles IV in 1649 was a seismic break in the order of things, the divine right of kings publicly shattered. For Father Leo, researching this period, a question arose. Did the keepers of the Crimson Pact see this as a disaster or an opportunity? His answer came from an unexpected source: the private diaries of Elias Ashmole, the famed antiquarian and royalist. Ashmole recorded a curious meeting in 1656, during the Cromwellian interregnum, with an elderly exiled courtier from the Palatinate. The courtier, over brandy, spoke of the king's true blood, not meaning Charles the Hero in exile, but the blood that lies beneath the blood, which flows from the eternal city and waters the tree of kingdoms. He claimed that before his death, Charles IV had entrusted a key of understanding to his Catholic wife Henrietta Maria, who had smuggled it to France. This key was not a physical object, Ashmole deduced, but a cipher. The courtier, slightly in his cups, drew a symbol on a napkin, a circle divided into four with a small dark centre, a black sun within a quadrant. "It is the map," the courtier whispered, "to the first debt." Leo connected this to Lucretia's final line about what we buried beneath the foundation stone of St. Peter's. The Crimson Pact, then, was not just about blood. It was about a transaction, a debt. The papacy of Alexander VI had buried something, or someone, and in return his bloodline was granted. What? Influence? Longevity? A claim? The secret was a chain, linking the throne of St. Peter to the thrones of Europe through a buried truth so potent it could unmake faiths. The restoration of Charles II in 1660 seemed a return to normalcy. But Leo saw the hidden pattern reasserting itself. Charles II, the Berry monarch, was famously tolerant and politically astute. He had no legitimate heirs, but a legion of illegitimate children whom he ennobled generously. Among his mistresses was the bold and intelligent Barbara Villiers, Duchess of Cleveland, a descendant of the same Buckingham who served James I. In her household accounts, Leo found a recurring payment to a Signor F., keeper of curiosities. Signor F. was later identified as a Florentine mystic who had presented the Duchess with a genealogy chart, now lost, tracing a secondary line of remarkable antiquity through the Dukes of Buckingham back to a daughter of the papal chambers. The secret was nurturing its own, ensuring its carriers prospered in the shadows of the throne, not upon it. The trail grew hotter and more dangerous as Leo moved into the 18th century. The bloodline, he believed, was now deeply embedded within the sprawling aristocracy of Britain and Europe. Its next major intervention came with the Hanoverian succession. When the Protestant elector George thus of Hanover became King of Great Britain in 1714, it was to prevent the Catholic Stuarts from reclaiming the throne. It was a clean break, or so it seemed. But Leo discovered correspondence between George III's mother, Sophia of the Palatinate, and the philosopher Gottfried Leibniz. Sophia, the granddaughter of James I, was the conduit through which the Hanoverians inherited the British crown. In a letter, Leibniz, her confidant, consoles her about the complexities of the succession, writing, "The visible line is but a river. The subterranean stream which you have long been steward of flows stronger and deeper and will find its course regardless of the rocks placed above it." Sophia was a steward of the subterranean stream, the hidden bloodline. This meant the Hanoverians, the new Protestant dynasty meant to secure Britain against Catholic influence, were themselves unwitting, or perhaps witting, carriers of the oldest Catholic secret of all, the Borgia-Papal Covenant. George I's dour and disconnected from Britain may never have known, but his son George II, and more importantly his wife Caroline of Ansbach, were intellectual powerhouses. Caroline's private library, catalogued after her death, contained a heavily annotated copy of Machiavelli's The Prince bound in plain leather. Within the annotations, in a code Leo painstakingly broke, were references to the Italian woman's gambit and maintaining balance through concealed pressure. Caroline was a practical political operator. Was she applying centuries-old Borgia principles to manage the court of her husband and later her son? The secret had evolved. It was no longer about mere survival or infiltration. It was about statecraft. The bloodline's influence was a tool for realpolitik. This reached a climax during the reign of George III. The king's famous madness has been diagnosed as porphyria. But Leo found, in the papers of his German doctor, Franz Mesmer, briefly consulted, a strange observation. The king, in his fevered states, would speak in fluent Italian, a language he had never formally studied, and draw intricate, repetitive diagrams of labyrinths with a black dot at the centre. He would repeat the phrase, "Il debito deve essere pagato," the debt must be paid. The doctors dismissed it as gibberish. Leo heard the echo of the exiled Palatinate courtier. The first debt. The buried truth beneath St. Peter's was a debt, and the bloodline, perhaps manifesting in the tortured mind of a mad king, felt the weight of its coming due. The French Revolution provided a violent backdrop for the secret's next act. As heads rolled in Paris, the aristocracy of Europe trembled. Among those fleeing was a minor Italian noble, Count Alessandro di Borgiano, who claimed descent from a junior ecclesiastical branch of the Borgias. He sought refuge in England, petitioning the Privy Council for protection based on services rendered to the Crown in perpetuity. His petition was denied, but his private journal, seized upon his subsequent arrest for debt, survived in the Home Office files. In it he wrote of a sacred trust passed down in his family, to be keepers of the seal, until the principal line called for it. The seal he described was a ceramic medallion, broken in two, depicting the black sun quadrant. One half, he claimed, was held by his family. The other was, with the guardian of the vault. The principal line, the guardian of the vault. Leo's mind raced. The secret had structure, hierarchy. There was the hidden bloodline, the principal line, and there were attendants like this count who served as archivists and guardians of physical tokens. The vault could only be the one beneath St. Peter's, but who was its guardian in the late 1700s? The journal provided a clue. The count wrote of his grandfather meeting the guardian in 1720, describing him only as a man of the cloth, but not of the Roman cloth, a cleric of the Northern Church. A Protestant clergyman. This suggested the secret had transcended its Catholic origins, becoming an ecumenical, or perhaps a purely power political concern. The journal's most chilling entry was its last. The count, destitute in a London garret, wrote, "The revolution has unleashed the antitype. They seek the vault not to honour the debt, but to void it through destruction. The principal line must be warned. The seal must be made whole. The black sun rises in the east now, not as a symbol of pact, but of obliteration." He then listed 3 names. 2 were obscure German princelings. The third was La Dame de Mecklenburg, the Duchess of Mecklenburg. This was a direct link to the house of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, the family of Queen Charlotte, wife of George III. The secret was circling back intimately to the British royal family. The bloodline and its guardians were under a new threat, one born of the revolutionary age that sought to erase all old secrets and debts in a tide of blood and reason. The 19th century, the age of empire and industry, should have buried such Gothic secrets forever. But Father Leo found them adapting, wearing the respectable mask of Victorian philanthropy and occultism. His research led him to the door of one of the most enigmatic figures of the era, John Ruskin, the famed art critic and social thinker. Ruskin's private diaries, released long after his death, contained passages of startling paranoia and mystical obsession. He wrote of a veiled queenship that underpinned the visible monarchy, a line of moral and aesthetic authority flowing from the Renaissance popes, perverted yet potent. He believed the true duty of the British aristocracy was to be stewards of this corrupted sublime. Ruskin corresponded extensively with Lady Charlotte Schreiber, a famed collector of porcelain and ceramic medallions. In one letter, he thanks her for showing him the broken disc from the Umbrian workshop, noting its symbolism corresponds precisely to the diagrams in the Dresden Mysterium. Leo tracked down Lady Charlotte's collection, now in the Victoria and Albert Museum. Among her pieces was indeed a broken ceramic plaque, catalogued as possibly a Renaissance architectural fitting. It showed half of a quadrant design. The other half was never found. This was a physical piece of the seal. It had moved from the failed Count di Borgiano into the hands of a Welsh industrialist's wife, a confidant of a Victorian sage. The secret was now in the realm of collectors' nesthetes. But it also had a darker outlet. Leo delved into the world of late 19th century occult societies, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the Theosophists. In the papers of S. L. MacGregor Mathers, a founder of the Golden Dawn, he found a ritual titled The Invocation of the Black Sun, described as a means to tap into lineages of hidden authority. The ritual's diagrams were exact copies of the quadrant symbol. Mathers claimed he received the ritual from a continental adept, whose family had served the papal and imperial courts. The secret had been commodified, turned into a ritual for power-hungry mystics. It was leaking from the bloodline into the subconscious of the age, distorting as it spread. The original debt and pact were being forgotten, replaced by a vague symbol of esoteric power. The cataclysms of the 20th century provided the ultimate test for the secret. Father Leo, now an old man himself, saw the pattern reaching a terrifying crescendo. His research took a dark turn into the roots of Nazi occultism. The Ahnenerbe, the SS research division devoted to proving Aryan supremacy, had a sub-unit dedicated to genealogical research. Among their target lists, declassified decades later, was Die Schwarze Sonnenlinie, the Black Sun Line. The file was mostly destroyed, but a cover memo remained, stating the goal was to identify and assimilate or terminate this competing lineage of spiritual authority, which claims primacy through southern Mediterranean corruption. The Nazis, with their obsession with pure bloodlines and hidden powers, had stumbled upon the Crimson Pact. They saw it not as a debt to be paid, but as a rival blood cult to be exterminated or co-opted. This explained Count di Borgiano's frantic warning about the black sun rising in the east as obliteration. The secret had attracted the attention of the most destructive regime in history. Leo found evidence that the Nazis had interrogated Vatican archivists in 1943 and had even dug, illicitly and unsuccessfully, in the crypts beneath St. Peter's, searching for the vault of the first debt. But what of the principal line? Leo's most startling discovery came from cross-referencing Nazi target lists with British intelligence files. MI5 in the 1930s had placed under discreet surveillance a small circle of European aristocrats living in London. They were not suspected of treason, but of being potential focal points for obscure continental mythos cults with possible political ramifications. One name on the list was a certain Baroness von Uffeln, a minor Hanoverian noblewoman living in Chelsea. Her file noted she was a keen genealogist, and had, in 1938, privately published a pamphlet titled On the Transmission of Sacral Kingship, the Unseen Succession. The MI5 agent summarized it as incoherent mystical drivel, but noted the Baroness had received visits from several Baltic German academics, later linked to the Ahnenerbe. She was, Leo realized with a shock, a likely candidate for a modern guardian, or even a member of the principal line itself. The war had been, for her, not just a geopolitical struggle, but a hidden war for the survival of a centuries-old secret. In the post-war rubble, the secret seemed to go dormant, or perhaps it simply fragmented further. Father Leo's quest became a race against his own mortality. He tracked the Baroness von Uffeln's fate. She died in 1957 in a car accident in Switzerland. Her effects were auctioned. Among them, bought by a private bidder listed only as Cercle d'études, was a collection of genealogical charts and occult manuscripts. The Cercle d'études was an obscure Parisian literary society. Leo, using his last contacts in the church, managed to access a French police report from 1972, when the Society's premises were searched after a member was implicated in a fraud case. The inventory listed several boxes of historical fantasy material. The trail went cold, commodified and dismissed by the modern world. But the original vault, the physical anchor of the secret, remained. Leo, using his archival knowledge, turned his attention to the foundations of St. Peter's Basilica. The necropolis beneath, believed to be the tomb of St. Peter himself, was excavated in the 1940s. The official findings were world-changing for the church. But Leo, reading the unpublished field notes of one of the junior archaeologists, found a discrepancy. The notes mentioned a sealed lateral chamber, not Roman, medieval in construction, bearing a faded graffito of a geometric design off the main excavated path. The chamber was deemed structurally unsafe and of no religious significance, and was sealed again with reinforced concrete without being fully entered. The archaeologist's sketch of the graffito was crude but unmistakable, a quadrant with a dark centre, the black sun. The Vatican had found it and reburied it. The what that Alexander VI and Lucretia had buried, the first debt, was still there, physically present beneath the high altar of Christendom. The Church, whether out of fear, sanctity, or a desire to keep the pact, had chosen silence. This was the ultimate secret, not just a bloodline, but a physical truth, a relic or a document or something else, that constituted a debt so profound it could, in Lucretia's words, unmake faiths. Was it proof of something that contradicted church history? The body of someone who should not be there? A contract with something unspeakable? Father Leo Kirsch died in 1998, alone in a small flat in Rome, surrounded by photocopies, notes and maps. His life's work, a sprawling interconnected manuscript titled Sub Sol Negro, A Hidden History of the West, was never published. He willed it to a former student, a secular historian named Elena Marchetti, with a single scribbled note. The debt is real. The principal line endures. They will come for the vault again. Warn them. Elena, sceptical but intrigued, began to read. At first she saw it as the magnificent obsession of a brilliant but unbalanced mind, work of historical fiction woven from loose threads, but the evidence was meticulous. The archival references, the reproduced documents, the chains of provenance. She decided to test one small part. She followed Leo's footnotes to the Scottish records about James IV's Larach Dorsa. Visiting Stirling, she used modern ground-penetrating radar on the section of wall Leo had identified. The scan revealed an anomaly, a small void space behind 3 meters of stone, inaccessible. It was exactly where Leo's sources said it would be. A chill went down her spine. It was real. She began her own investigation, starting with the modern principal line. Using Leo's methods and modern DNA genealogy databases, the kind used by amateur ancestry hunters, she looked for patterns. She focused on families linked to the minor German princely houses Leo had mentioned, tracing female line descent. It was a maze of intermarriage, but a pattern did emerge, a surprising number of descendants from these lines, now scattered across Europe and America, shared a rare mitochondrial DNA haplogroup, one with strong Southern European, specifically Italian, origins. Furthermore, several of these individuals, unbeknownst to each other, were patrons of Renaissance art restoration, collectors of obscure ceremonial keys, or scholars of pre-Reformation church history. It was as if the bloodline carried a genetic and psychological imprint, a subtle pull towards the secret, even when the conscious knowledge was lost. Elena realized the secret was not a single conspiracy, but a dormant virus in the body of history. It flared up in times of crisis. Reformation, revolution, war. When those who carried its markers felt the subconscious pull to act, to protect, or to seek. The debt was the original infection, and the 21st century, with its crumbling institutions, its digital panopticon, and its hunger for alternative histories, was the perfect petri dish for its reawakening. Elena's breakthrough came through a digital mistake. A European auction house, uploading its archive, accidentally published high-resolution images of lots from a 2005 estate sale. One lot was a 19th century devotional diptych. The image clearly showed, on the inside of one wooden panel, not a painting, but a finely inlaid design in ebony and mother of pearl, a perfect, complete black sun quadrant. The provenance listed it as property of a lady of title. Using her contacts, Elena traced the buyer, a trust based in Liechtenstein. Further digging revealed the trust was a shell, but its director was a lawyer who also represented a charitable foundation run by a reclusive billionaire tech entrepreneur known for his interest in long-termism and preserving human legacy. This modern, hyper-rational figure was collecting symbols of the secret. Why? Was he a new guardian, a new seeker of the vault? Or did he see the debt as a systemic risk to be managed, a piece of historical malware to be understood and neutralized? The secret had jumped from mystics and aristocrats to the realm of data and capital. The power dynamics had shifted, but the central mystery remained. What, in God's name or the devil's, was buried beneath St. Peter's? Elena knew she had to see the graffito for herself. Using her academic credentials, she applied for rare access to the restricted scavy, the necropolis under the basilica. Her request was denied, then, strangely, approved with stringent conditions. She would be accompanied by 2 members of the Vatican Gendarmerie at all times and could take no photographs. When she descended into the cool, silent world of ancient tombs, she felt the weight of centuries. Her guides were polite but impassive. She followed the tourist route to the tomb of St. Peter. Then, feigning a stumble, she glanced down a side passage barred by a simple modern iron gate. On the wall just beyond it, illuminated by a dim safety light, she saw it. Faded red ochre on yellow brick. The quadrant, the black sun. It was small, unassuming, a scratch on history's skin, but it was there. As she was hurried away, one of the guards, an older man with tired eyes, said quietly in Italian, "Some doors, signorina, are locked for a reason. Not to keep us out, but to keep what is inside, in." Returning to London, Elena found her flat had been burglarized. Nothing of obvious value was taken, but her computer was gone, along with all her physical notes and Father Leo's manuscript. The only thing left was a single sheet of paper placed neatly on her desk. It was a high-quality print of an old document. She recognized it. It was the first page of Lucrezia Borgia's letter, the one Leo had transcribed. But at the bottom, in crisp modern font, a message had been added. The debt is not a metaphor. It is a biological continuance. The vault contains the origin. The principal line is its custodian. Your inquiry is noted. Cease. It was not a threat, but a statement. A warning from someone who knew everything she had uncovered, and more. They were not denying the secret. They were asserting control over its narrative. The origin? Was it a body? A testament? Something that proved the Borgia papacy had done something so monumental, so unnatural, that it bound their fate to the fate of Europe? A biological continuance suggested something living, or something about lineage itself. Elena, now frightened but irrevocably hooked, made a decision. She would go public, but not with a grand claim. She would release a podcast, a documentary series. She would present Father Leo's research as a fascinating what-if, a historical mystery. She would invite experts, discuss the documents, visit the locations. She would hide the most dangerous connections in plain sight, within a popular format. The goal would not be to prove the truth, but to make the question so compelling that others would start looking. To scatter the seeds of the secret into the wind of the internet, where no one entity could control them all. She would force the hidden hand into the light by the sheer weight of public curiosity. She named the project History 1. Her first series would be called Beneath the Crown, Secrets They Buried. She would start with Lucretia's letter and the Crimson Pact. She would trace the shadow line through history, just as Leo had, and she would end with the unanswered question. What is the debt? What lies in the vault? She would invite her audience to look, to wonder, and to ask. For in the asking, the secret's power to exist purely in the shadows would begin to erode. Tonight, as you listen to this, the first episode, know that the story is still being written. The principal line endures. Unaware or acutely aware, the guardian of the vault keeps watch. The seekers with new motives, tech oligarchs, data mystics, history hackers, circle the ancient mystery. And beneath the greatest church in Christendom, behind concrete and silence, lies the origin, the first debt, waiting. The crowns of Europe have been worn, fought over, and displayed in museums. But the true weight was never the gold or the jewels. It was the secrets they buried, the lies that founded lineages, the pacts signed in blood and sacrament, the debts owed across time. This is the history that whispers in the stone, that flows in hidden veins of blood, that stares back from portraits with knowing eyes. This is the history beneath the crown. Subscribe to History 1. For the next episode, we descend into the Larish Dorture of Stirling Castle and follow the ghost of a king to the field of Flodden, where a pact may have been broken and a crown truly forfeit. The secrets are waiting. Will you listen?